So hello, hello. I hope you can hear us now. We had some technical difficulties, but we should be in our full game, I guess. So let us, hi guys. So if you can hear us, just ping us a message that you can hear us. So because I see a lot of people joining from across the globe, and we have people from Slovenia, Hungary, which Rachel will be excited about, and just guys from the US. So we're really excited to be here, and we just want to check if everybody can hear us. So if, I don't know, let's say Alex Hulk can say that he can hear us from Germany, that would be cool. And so what we're going to do today is that I'm going to introduce Rachel in a little bit. She's going to walk you through really fascinating stuff you can do when it comes to FinTech. It sounds very complex, but the way she puts it, it's really simple and really easy to apply. And what I want to say about Rachel is that I'm really, really impressed with her because she co-founded her own company, BeHive. And first time we spoke, I was really impressed with her, how eloquent she was and with her expertise. But I was also very impressed with her ability to sustain an impressive amount of heat, because she was wearing a turtleneck and I was wearing a tank top. But then it turned out that she was not in the same zone. I thought we were both enduring like extreme heat of Central Europe, but actually in London, and she's still there, and I'm in Slovakia. That is said, people from Hungary will be pleased because she's a Hungarian native, and she actually has some plans of going back, right, Rachel? So
yeah.
Could you just tell us a little bit about that? Like, you're currently in LSE, which is impressive in itself, but you're also thinking of going back. So just tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you so much for being here. So I'm going back to Hungary in a month or so, but I'm currently finishing my MSc at LSE. And I came here for 1 year to get a more rigorous understanding of behavioral science and to improve even my current understandings further, both from a theoretical and a methodological perspective. And I'm going back to continue building BeHive with my team. And it's based in Budapest right now. And the purpose for us is to bring behavioral science into Hungary and to create a place for people where they can also apply behavioral science there, because we didn't have any companies or any practitioners in behavioral science up to 2 years ago to apply there. And also in the region, it's still quite new. So I'm very excited to go back and try to encourage other people to apply behavioral science there and to grow our team further.
And could you maybe tell us, like, behavioral science, sometimes it sounds very intimidating for people. Sometimes they're not even aware what that is and kind of embarrassed to admit it. So do you remember, like, the first time you kind of got, like, bitten by bee bug, or should I say bee? Like, what really going on there? Like, what was the primary source of your interest?
Yeah, so it was during my undergraduate degree in Hungary, and I was studying applied economics, and I decided to take an elective course in behavioral economics. And that's the first time I encountered this course, and it was really fascinating to me how it can explain the shortcomings of traditional economic models, which is what I've been taught for the previous months and years. So that's where it started for me. And later on, I tried to take all the possibilities and opportunities to take on all the courses at the university, other courses in behavioral science and economic psychology, to try to expand my knowledge. And I also moved my dissertation in this direction. And then we co-founded the company in Hungary because, as I said earlier, this was not a place where we could go work in Hungary earlier. And that's when later I decided to come to LSE to get an even more rigorous understanding and further training in this field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so heads up is, like, if you have founded or co-founded your own company, let us know in the comments. So ask questions. Rachel will walk us through her presentation, but there will be time for questions along the way. We will answer maybe not all of them, but we will try to answer as many as we can. And there will be also a special kind of deal for you attending, which I will get to a little bit later on. But as for today, Rachel, what are you going to talk about today, and why did you choose this?
Yeah, so today I'm going to talk about the behavioral science approach to increasing engagement with FinTech services. And this is still a relatively new topic. And the reason I chose this topic is because we've been doing quite a few projects in this area. And I wanted to share with you some of the methods we have been applying and using for our projects in FinTech. And I think it's a very important topic, but it's important to know that it's not, the things I will be showing today is not only applicable to FinTech, but it's really applicable to other challenges and other services or industries as well. And hopefully I simplified it in a sense that everyone can have a very easy understanding of it. And hopefully I can provide some new insights even to those who are already familiar with behavioral science.
Okay, great. Excited. So let's get right into it.
Sure. So today's topic is a behavioral science approach to increasing engagement with FinTech services. And the agenda for today is first, I'm going to introduce to you a little bit about BeHive and our team. And then I'm going to go through the three main challenges which we will be covering today: reaching a broader market base, upselling of premium products, and instilling trust. And at the end, we will have an open Q&A. So BeHive is one of the first behavioral science consultancies in the CE region, and it's the first one in Hungary, which we founded in 2019. And as I said, our team is based in Budapest, but we have a very strong international presence, both from the perspective of our client and also from the perspective of our team. We approach business challenges from a customer-focused behavioral perspective, leveraging the unique problem-solving toolkit of behavioral science. We tackle both business challenges, both B2B and B2C, and we also have a strong focus on social challenges. So our work is based on four main pillars, which is research, consulting, design, and knowledge building. And we apply this across many industries, ranging from mobility, telco, medtech, fintech, and insurance as well. But we also have a strong focus on the nonprofit sector, and we've done projects in the past year on sustainability, increasing the vaccination uptake, and also reducing food waste. Oh, sorry. And here you can see our team. Our team consists of both behavioral science professionals and subject matter expertise. We have a very international and multidisciplinary team, and we're all united around behavioral science, but we have strong background in many other disciplines, including economics, finance, psychology, neuroscience, and design as well. And it's important for us that we've gained our knowledge from the top institutions in the world, and most of us have actually studied in the UK, which is where some of the most cutting-edge research is being conducted in behavioral science. And this is important because it enables us to bring some of the most rigorous and state-of-the-art approaches to our clients. So moving on to FinTech, over the past decade, we have seen a lot of digital disruptions across many areas and sectors, which are now well established. For instance, this was the case with the on-demand service Uber, disrupting the traditional service like taxis, Netflix completely changing the television and the movie industry, and Airbnb disrupting the hospitality industry. And recently, we can see a similar but more recent change caused by fintechs who are disrupting the banking industry. However, they are still lagging behind compared to their traditional counterparts. Some of these disruptors include the UK-based Revolut and Monzo, and also the German-based N26. And as we see consumers changing their needs and shifting towards more personalized softwares, fintechs can really provide a more functional, convenient, and affordable service to their users. However, because this industry is so new and because it's developing so rapidly, many people are still slow to adapt and several challenges remain. Therefore, understanding and overcoming these challenges requires the understanding of human behavior, and this is where behavioral science comes in. Behavioral science, importantly, not only provides understanding of the root cause of the problem, but it also provides a unique toolkit to design powerful interventions and overcome these challenges. And actually, fintechs are already applying behavioral science. For instance, two famous ones, Lemonade and Capital, both are based in the US. Lemonade is an insurtech company which applies behavioral science to foster trust. And Capital is a personal finance app which applies behavioral science to encourage savings and help people achieve their goals. And the success of these two companies really shows the relevance and the power of behavioral science and how it can bring new layers to such services value proposition. However, despite this immense market potential, as I mentioned, several challenges remain. The first one is reaching a broader market base, so increasing the speed of adoption. The second one is upselling premium products, which is a very common issue with the freemium service industry. And the third one is promoting trust in fintech products, which is crucial for both reaching new customers and upselling and monetizing your users. So going into the first problem, which is reaching a broader market base, in this section, I'm going to cover three important methods that you can utilize to increase the number of customers, and I'll show you different examples and case studies and how this has been done before. So the three main methods are decreasing the required investment, which is in order to increase the follow-through from intention to action. The second one is to contextualize the benefits, which can increase the value perception of the offered services. And the third one is to utilize the power of social norms, which can further provide reassurance to increase adoption. So one of the common pitfalls of losing potential customers is the presence of the so-called intention-action gap, which is when one's attitudes or intentions do not match their actions. Companies often place a very high focus on creating intentions, but they mistakenly overlook or place low importance on reducing this gap, thus facilitating action. And there's many reasons to why this intention gap is present, but one of the reasons is a desire for immediate gratification. For instance, when you're choosing an unhealthy food over healthy ones, when intending to go on a diet, or postponing to start exercising are all examples of people's preferences not being in line with their behavior. However, an even more relevant reason, which is what we will be focusing on today, is a poorly designed choice environment. And this can mean a variety of things. For instance, overly complex decision environments, such as overchoice, or it can even be minor inconveniences like hassle factors and friction points inhibiting follow-through. Therefore, one way to reduce this intention-action gap is by altering the decision environment in a way which facilitates choice, and this is what we often refer to as choice architecture. So I wanted to demonstrate this through an example N26, which is one of the leading fintechs in Germany, and how they could redesign their choice architecture to tackle intention-action gap, which leads to indecision. And just as a note, this is also a very good technique for helping people with upselling, so it's just as applicable for the second problem. So on the image on the right, it's not important to read it at this point. It's just really to show you the number of choices that N26 presents to their potential customers. So if you go onto the N26 website, this is what will be initially presented, which is the 3 different options. And this is only a part of it. So this attributes actually continues for another 1 or 2 screens that didn't fit on the screen. And although this layout is able to get the necessary information out, the categorization is likely to lead to cognitive overload and thus create indecision. Our brains are not designed to comprehend all this incoming information at once and make an optimal decision. And when our brain is overloaded, people are more likely to be indecisive. Some of the behavioral science principles which are at play here are attribute overload, which is similar to choice overload, but instead of the number of choices being too many, it's the number of attributes which a user has to, or a potential customer has to face. And we know that people have difficulty choosing among options with complex range of attributes. And one important thing to do here for fintech providers is to conduct rigorous qualitative research to identify which features matter the most and ensure that they don't bombard people with too many attributes, but they really present the ones that are most important to their users. And attribute overload can also lead to decision paralysis, which happens when we have to select from options which are difficult to compare. And this can also lead to indecision, or it can even lead to people having regretting their choice later on. A third issue can be low perceived ability. And based on our primary research and also a lot of the secondary research which is available online, we know that people have relatively low financial literacy. And in this case, this choice environment is very complex for someone with low financial literacy, and they will have a low perceived ability and thus lead to frustration and also to indecision. So the question is, how can we facilitate action here? There are many nudges and techniques that can be utilized to facilitate action, among which simplification and the use of defaults have proven to be some of the most effective techniques. And this is based, for instance, on a systematic review on nudges. If I remember correctly, a 2014 paper by Sunstein, if some of you are more interested in the theory, which shows the effectiveness of different nudges. Behavioral science suggests that ease or difficulty of processing the information and completing mental tasks can affect judgments and decisions. And when the amount of information is problematic, it's important to reduce the number of options, to provide an easy way to sort and filter through. Research also suggests that we judge fluent statements that are easy to process, more true and likable, and tend to put off choosing when faced with disfluent statements. And fluency can refer to 3 things. It can be linguistic fluency, which is whether we know the words that are presented, perceptual fluency, which is whether we see blurred or sharp images, and also conceptual fluency, which is familiar and unfamiliar ideas and concepts. And it's important for any service provider, but especially in fintech, to try to ensure that you have fluency in all these domains. The next one is framing effects and translating attributes. Behavior is strongly influenced by the way the context and the information is framed. Therefore, one way to facilitate action is by framing the decision in a way which places more emphasis on the benefits than on the attributes. And we will get an example on this in just a minute on the next slide. But I also wanted to mention defaults and recommendations, which is already widely known and used in many, many contexts and have shown to be very powerful. But surprisingly, based on our research, some of the fintechs are still really underutilizing this. So on this slide, I want to demonstrate how all of the prior mentioned techniques can be integrated into one. On the right side, you can see how a behavioral scientist would design such a page. And on the left side, you can see the example of Revolut with their different packages. And even based on an initial impression, I think it's safe to say that on the right, it's a much easier choice environment. But this is not by chance. This one on the right, created by Capital, actually has a very carefully crafted design and utilizes many findings from behavioral science, which can eliminate cognitive overload and facilitate decision making. So just think of the analogy of an umbrella and the rain. On the left side, they're focusing on an attribute appeal. So an umbrella in an attribute appeal would be the color, the size, the material, and so on. However, the benefit appeal of describing this umbrella is really what is the benefit this umbrella can bring, such as protecting us from the bad weather. And this is exactly the main difference between the two. On the left side, we can see an attribute appeal by Revolut, who promotes the product in terms of its physical features. So the number of currencies you can exchange, the interest rate, and it even mentions the color and types of cards. However, in benefit appeal, they emphasize the results of owning and using the product, such as the convenience, the happiness, or the status gained from it. So if we can look into Capital, for instance, when they say invest for big goals confidently, an attribute appeal would be to stay diversified with low-cost funds. And it's important to know that Capital also provides a list of attributes on their website once you click on that drop-down. But initially, they don't bombard users with too many attributes, and they try to emphasize the benefit and contextualize the attributes in what it will bring to the user. You can also see the use of default on the right, and it's also actually utilizing decoy effect, because on the third package, which is actually twice the price of the second one, it only adds a couple of more advantages, which makes the second one appear better. And this is also a decoy effect, and it also creates the use of default. The next point is about utilizing the power of social norms. So social norms are known to be one of the most effective nudges, and it's defined as the unwritten rules about how individuals should behave in a group. When we're not sure what to do or how to behave, a critical source of information comes from the behavior of others. And this can be well explained through the example of the two restaurants. I think some of you might be knowing this, but those of you new to behavioral science, I think it's nice to get the idea through this. So if you're in an unknown city and you're looking at two different restaurants and you cannot choose between them, and you see that one of them is full and one of them is empty, you're more likely to go to the one which is full because you believe that there is an information asymmetry and that they must have more information than you. So this is the idea of social norms. And social norms can be categorized into injunctive norms, which is what we should be doing, what's the right behavior, and descriptive norms, which is what others are doing. However, there's also a third type of social norm that's just been recently discussed, and I think it's still quite underutilized, is the dynamic social norm, which draws attention to a norm over time instead of in its current state, so it's not a static norm. One example here, which is just using arbitrary numbers, would be the number of people who use online banking apps increased by 60% from 2018 to 2021. And dynamic social important, especially when you're trying to promote a minority. So for instance, in a country where the FinTech adoption is relatively low, or when a new FinTech player wants to enter the market. And on the top right, I just wanted to show you a quick example of one of our recent social norm applications in our project. This was a project on improving recycling behavior in the workplace. And besides implementing other techniques as well, such as commitment devices and increasing the salience of information, we utilized this social norm technique and reached an 85% increase in recycling. And the idea was that we started measuring back the improvement in recycling and displayed this social norm message on the people's screensaver. It includes a reinforcing message like great job or thank you for trying, and also the feedback of how others are behaving. So in the past week, 85% of the trash has been recycled properly. It also incorporates the messenger effect by seeing the handwritten signatures in the bottom, which based on our research happened to be the local cleaning ladies. But we also emphasize the negative aspects, that 15% of the trash is still recycled improperly. And this was a very powerful implementation from our side that helped keep up the positive behavior and positive change in recycling. A last point I want to make here is that the effectiveness of social norm interventions really depends on whether customers can identify with the social group in question. And N26 does this perfectly because they create a sense of social identity through lifestyle branding. And this is achieved through the strategic use of their partnerships. So you can see here, some of their partners are Headspace, the Wellbeing app, Adidas, and Booking.com. So the second problem is upselling of premium products. So far, we discussed some ideas on how we can increase the customer base, but the next challenge is if once people adopt it, how can we increase upselling and how can we make them turn to premium services? And this is a big problem of the freemium model, which is characterized by very high market share, but they often fall subject to the stickiness of this free option. And one of the main challenges of upselling is due to the so-called status quo bias, which is defined as the preference for the current state of affairs. There are several reasons for this status quo bias, but one of them, which is good for demonstration here, is habitual complacency. As we know, breaking a habit is very hard unless there's a strong reason to do so. And I think this can be very well demonstrated through the diagram on the left, which is a simplified process of adoption. So an individual will have a need or a certain want. They're going to search for different alternatives. They will assess the benefits and the disadvantages among them, and they're going to choose and adopt to a certain one. And once they have adopted, they're going to evaluate their choice. And if this choice has a positive feedback, it's going to lead to habitual complacency. And this will continue unless there is a form of dissatisfaction, or alternatively, it can also be a positive trigger. Another issue leading to the problem of upselling is the power of free, which further worsens this issue. As we know, anything free is greatly motivating and attractive to us. And there's been many, many studies which show that how people are behaving irrationally when the power of free is at play. And this can also be partially explained by the notion of loss aversion, since we know that people are 2 times more sensitive to losses than to an equal amount of gain. And lastly, what's contributing to this issue is low financial literacy, as based on also our research recently in Germany, for instance, only about 30% of people have above financial literacy. And this creates an inability for them to evaluate the benefits, which can lead to uncertainty and indecision as well. So in order to resolve this, the idea is to facilitate reevaluation, which can be achieved by creating a positive or a negative external cue, which will then disrupt the status quo. And on this slide, I just want to bring a couple of techniques which can be applied to monetize your customers. I will not be able to go into too much detail here, but I think it's a good visualization of some simple techniques that can be utilized. So on the left side, we can see an opt-in model, which is moving from a standard offer to a premium offer. And here what's crucial is to create a friction point. So to recalibrate the standard offering in order to create a need for customers to upgrade. And Spotify is doing this very successfully, for instance, by creating a disruption to the advertisement during streaming. A second example is to reach customers in the right state of mind, for instance, by utilizing personalized communication techniques. And what's essential here is to focus on grabbing the attention at the moment when the users can take action, and to also provide action steps. On the other side, we can see the opt-out model, which is, for instance, if someone tries a 30-day free premium offer, and then they might be thinking to opt out at the end. One technique here is to create a sense of investment. If people feel that they have put enough time and effort into creating this personal experience, they will less likely to leave the premium offer. And again, an example from here is Spotify, when they let users to create their own music and save it during the free trial. And if they were to go back to the standard offer, they would lose this investment and they would lose this time and effort they have put into creating it. And lastly, loss aversion is also very important here. So for instance, we can, instead of offering users a benefit for upselling, we can give it to them to begin with and then require to sign up to keep hold of them. And while this might seem two very similar solutions, because of the notion of loss aversion, and because people hate to lose twice as much as they like to gain, this is also a very powerful way to monetize your customers. And the third one is instilling trust in fintech services. So in this section, I will discuss some of the main inhibitors of trust from a behavioral perspective and outline 3 interventions which can foster trust in fintech services. So studies show that people trust fintech providers significantly less than traditional banks. And this study conducted by the clearinghouse says that 99% of users are at least concerned about their privacy while using fintech apps. And there's also a lot of other statistics on how people are much less trustful towards fintech services than towards traditional banks. But the question is, what is causing this trust gap between fintechs and traditional players? Well, because fintechs are characterized by branchless banking, one of the factors which hinders trust towards fintech is the lack of physical presence. Consumers prefer to rely on the availability of an accessible, tangible, and definitive option which they can resort to receive psychological reassurance from at times of uncertainty. Another problem which further worsens this is the so-called availability bias. It's the human tendency to think that examples of things which come readily to our mind are more representative than actually the case. And this way, we put more weight on judgments which readily come to our mind. And this is exactly what's happening to fintechs as well. Due to the several scandals and scrutiny that certain companies have received, such as Wirecard scandal and how it led to its insolvency, or N26 leaving the UK, the availability heuristic plays a very strong role in people's memories and leaves a negative impression of fintechs. Another issue is the existing concerns and misperceptions, which we also often refer to as lay beliefs, for instance, around data protection and data privacy. And finally, the ambiguity aversion is also playing a strong role here, especially among people with relatively low financial literacy. And it's really the aversion of a decision in times of uncertainty. So it's the fear of the unknown. So in light of this, here's three key interventions we can do to increase trust in fintechs. The first one is to identify effective information channels. So in contexts where individuals have a lack of competency and they rely on the behavior of others to fill this information asymmetry, it's very important to utilize your existing customers in a more effective manner. And some examples here are gamification in the case of referral systems, or it can also be a more salient reviews, especially in the case of positive reviews. The second one is increasing the salience of trust-feeding factors. So because of the lack of physical presence, people cannot associate fintechs towards a trusted source. And by creating a hierarchical cognitive association, which means that you can associate fintech to a higher, more trusted source, we can overcome this problem. And some of the fintechs are already utilizing this, but unfortunately, they're not making it salient enough to new potential users. And the last one is targeting existing concerns and misperceptions, for instance, through targeted information provision or the use of comparative judgment. So these are several debiasing techniques, and I'm going to show you an example on the next slide. So one way to debias, debiasing technique is the use of comparative judgment. And as individuals think in relative terms, especially in areas which they are incompetent in, increasing the salience of higher performance compared to trusted banks we can address the misconception. So this is a case of N26. This is taken from their website, and this is what they say: safer than your regular bank. Using modern technologies, N26 is 4 times better at stopping card fraud, 3 times better at stopping identity theft, and 10 times better at stopping account takeovers. So this is a very powerful debiasing technique where the misconception is directly addressed and thus helps in building trust. And the final example I wanted to show you today is from the famous company Lemonade I mentioned in the beginning, the insurtech company in the US. And this is also taken from their website. This is in order to address switching costs. So what they've done is they created salient identities and provided statistics behind the percentage of people switching to them from more trusted and larger institutions. And this is very helpful in acquiring new customers, so addressing the switching cost and the perceived investment of switching. But it also helps in building trust as they're demonstrating others' behavior as we discuss social norms and creating salient identities as well. So this is what I wanted to share with you today, and I hope that this presentation gave you an intuition on how behavioral science can help with understanding and tackling the challenges of fintech. And we really can see behavioral science as a missing piece from fintech, which can help overcome the pressing challenges rooted in the understanding of human behavior. And it can help add a new layer to their value proposition and provide new solutions to fintechs. And on a more general note, behavioral science should be applied on top of traditional methods to further improve their value perception of the services. And they can both help uncover the root cause of the problems, which is essential in understanding what behaviors are driving the issue, but they also help to provide low-cost and powerful lasting interventions. So thank you very much, and feel free to ask any questions.
Thank you, Rachel. It was a really interesting stuff about things which some people might find intimidating, but this can also be applied to all walks of life. So guys, if you have any questions regarding anything, I know that we had one specific question. It was about, you mentioned article on effective nudges. So could you repeat the name of the article?
Yeah, I don't have the name. I can link it in later. It's based on Sunstein 2014, and it's a systematic review of different nudge techniques, and they're comparing the effectiveness of the different techniques. But I can find the paper and link it in afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Okay, or maybe we can include it in the email, in the follow-up email.
I will send it to you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so as I said, we already Rachel and we discussed other topics, fascinating stuff she's working on when it comes to making job ads more attractive, and also attracting women to car sharing services, which is something I didn't even know was a thing, but apparently is. So we come up to the part I already mentioned, that we have some special offer for you guys because you're attending this webinar. So what it is already on a platform inside BE. But we created this, and Rachel is our partner in this platform, and we have other experts, behavioral experts from all over the globe. And we founded it basically because, as we discussed with Rachel before this webinar, when you waited for us for 4 minutes and we didn't know what was going on, we found out that sometimes when it comes to practical applications in business, it gets more tricky. You can find really a lot of fascinating case studies, but they're applicable. So what we aim to do is to bring the best of what is going on in different businesses across the globe and bring it to you in a form which is easy to digest, perhaps probably fun to read. And it comes in many shapes and forms, which means we have case studies, we have articles targeted to specific topics. So let's say if you're interested in some sort of bias, let's say Rachel mentioned a couple of them, let's say choice overload or social proof, and you want to know how to best apply it, this is the place to go to. And for 1 month right now, we have a special offer, so you can access all the content for free. You can choose whichever plan you want to choose. You can choose annual or monthly plan, and you will not be charged for the first 30 days. And no worries, you will not get auto-charged. We will remind you 3 days before this offer is off, so there will be no unpleasant surprises. You can basically think of as Netflix, so you will be reassured, and only if you want to keep it, you will keep it. And just a heads up, we have 4 plans, so you can choose any of them, and it will be free for 30 days. So you can actually really access it to the fullest. So that's it for the shameless sales plug. And let's go back. Let's take it back to your questions you have. So can you provide us with some examples of using associations to facilitate trust? Do you have any example?
Yeah, so actually some of them are visible, especially on Revolut and N26, if you want to check out their website. And on their website, they're connecting themselves to other trusted sources. So I don't know especially which banks are behind them, but they saliently are mentioning that this bank is where your money is safe here, and your money is, let's say, protected up to 300,000 euros by this and this bank. So that is one way to create an association towards a larger, more trusted source, because people have a lack of physical connection or a lack of association with FinTech as a trusted source. So you can actually find them on the FinTech websites as well, and especially N26 and Revolut is already utilizing this.
Mm-hmm. And there's a question about whether this comes from your current research. We already talked about it, that some of the stuff is confidential, but these are the projects you're currently working on.
Yeah, so this is not, so we have several projects in FinTech. Yes, as I mentioned to Kristina, they're for now confidential, which I can maybe later share in the case studies on Inside BE. But a lot of these findings are things we ourselves have applied to our FinTech projects, not everything, but it's really a combination of things we've learned from across different projects on different issues and challenges. And some of them are also coming from literature and from other already tested and proven case studies as well. But a lot of them comes from our own work as well.
And one thing I was interested in, most of us know what social proof is. Like, it's basically showing that many people enjoy the same thing. You mentioned another, a little facet of it, which is dynamic social proof. Do you think there would be like a specific case you could use dynamic social proof, maybe when you're starting out and you don't have enough data? Or
yes.
Does anything else come to mind, like when this would be really cool to use and is underused, as you said?
Yeah, I think it's definitely underused and underlearned. So a lot of people don't know about this one. They also only know about injunctive norms and descriptive norms. I think the most useful case of this one is also something we're using currently, is when a new FinTech is trying to enter the market. So it's when they're in the case of a minority. It's also, I think, extremely useful, also, of course, not in FinTechs, but other sectors as well, when the adoption rate is relatively low. And when the adoption is low, you can't say 20% of people are already using it, because it won't be as impressive. So those are the times when you can rely on these dynamic social norms and showing the change over time. So I think that's especially important when something is new, something is still underused, and also, when new FinTechs are trying to enter the market.
Mm-hmm. And my other question would be, we have some question about ethics, which we'll get back to a little bit later. But my question is, you mentioned overchoice, and why do you think that even occurs, and how can we actually prevent it? Like, let's say we're not psychologists, we're not behavioral scientists, but still, what to be probably mindful when it comes to overchoice? As you said, that it's really a killer of decision making.
Yeah, so in fintechs, it's what I refer to as attribute over choice, which is very similar, but it's not the number of choices that's too many, but the number of attributes. And in this case, is what I think is important is to take into consideration that not everybody can understand, especially in the financial services, all of the different aspects. So what you can do is the case what Capital did is initially frame it in a way of what the benefits are, but make it very salient and make it very accessible to be able to get more information after. So I think it's essential that people can still access the information if they are capable of understanding and would want to know more, but they shouldn't be bombarded initially. So it should be a very easy filter in order to get to that information. I think that would be the right solution for most companies.
And does it then mean that you would probably compare them side by side and reduce the number of parameters and just like really list it like this includes this and this and this? That's what it means, making it easier to process?
Yeah, that as well. And also, I think, as I mentioned, to do more qualitative research on what is important to consumers. So this is also something we're currently doing with our FinTech project, is you cannot mention every attribute that you have. And it's important to understand what is it, the reason that they're choosing that package. So if they're choosing a premium option, which attributes are the ones that are important to them? And by doing more qualitative research on this, you can really prioritize between the attributes instead of just listing everything up that this certain service or product is capable of doing. So I think that's also very important to do more research on and understand what your consumers are using and which ones are the ones that they're buying at the moment.
Got it. Rachel, I hope you're good at receiving compliments because you just received a major one. Your PowerPoint is one of the best I've ever seen. So
that's very nice. Thank you.
That's really cool. And we will share the. Rachel is really. I was so impressed for the first time. I cannot slide my questions to back to the question I said we would get back to, but I think I remember the gist of it. It was about how do you square like ethical approach and using behavioral science and using everything we know about how we are swayed by biases and all that. How do you square that in your everyday life? You have a lot of projects from all walks of life. So what do you tell yourself when you go to sleep?
So this is a very broad question because ethics can be applied to many different ways and many different projects. I think it's important to have a checklist and to be able to understand what are the certain elements that you need to take into consideration. But to us, the number one ethical reason is to not take on projects that we don't believe are ethical. So for instance, even the choice of our projects and where we do apply behavioral science is very limited and it's very filtered. So I think that's very important to us as well. But there's also a lot of different frameworks and ways you can have an ethic checklist. And I think it's also I think there's a lot of things that I've learned from LSE, and that's a very strong focus on this institution onto ensuring ethics across all of your projects. So I think it's very important, but it also starts from what projects you're willing to take. So for instance, we would not be taking projects that are hurting people's behavior or that are hurting their habits and so on. So that is where it starts for us. But there is already a lot of frameworks and ways which we can check mark this and which we can make it more rigorous and clean, yes, and transparent.
I remember that I talked about this to Jess Groom, who's from Calgary, if you know the behavioral consultancy. And he said, it was really interesting to me, he talked about there was a restaurant menu they wanted to change. You can, by the way, find an article on Inside BE. They wanted to change a restaurant menu, and the basic objective was to increase average amount spent per customer. And he said that they really, really have a strong ethic framework, let's say, and they really considered this was kind of a high-end restaurant and people were not going to that restaurant that often. So it wouldn't really hurt their health and it really wouldn't hurt their budget if they spent a little bit more. It was 4 pence. The target goal was 4 pence and they actually tripled it. They raised it to 12 by their interventions. But he still came back to that, yes, but if it was probably fast food chain, we wouldn't have done it. Yeah. So it really comes down to not even exactly what kind of interventions you use, but then exactly the kind of business you use.
Making people eat more calories would not be probably less ethical.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. So there's a question, how to use context effectively. What would you say to that? That's really broad. I'm glad I'm not asked this question.
Yeah. So. That's very broad. I think, wow, is there any way we can narrow that question down a bit more?
We can, we can follow up with question. Yeah, we can follow up with a question from Flavia. And so she or he, I don't know, Italians, probably. Tell me where is he or she. Very often we find offering packages in 3 versions. basic, medium, premium. Is there any scientific rationale for this?
So why would have these three options?
Yeah, so going back kind of to context, because this is working with the context. So is there any rationale for that?
I mean, I think it's just people like to know what's like the basic one is to the free option people associate with it, and the premium one does also create a certain social identity. I mean, it depends again on the context, but a lot of people, based on our research on Revolut, for instance, choose the premium because they feel that they belong to this group. So I think the name here, for instance, matters in the case of fintechs or also in other industries on how you frame it. It could be framed differently, like small, medium, large as well. So premium definitely has a certain sound to it and a certain kind of status to it. I think that's definitely the rationale behind it. And basic is not a very appealing one. So I think people want others to upsell more and to go towards a more premium or higher option. But I think that would be my first intuition. But it's an interesting question. I haven't thought about this specifically, though.
I think probably I would add that sometimes it might be really relying on our tendency to be swayed by the middle option. So we don't want to feel like we're really cheap, but then we don't really want to feel like we're super eccentric. So like, yeah, like the middle option feels, okay, that's probably the best option. That's, by the way, why most people who don't have really strong preference would choose like mid-sized coffee, no matter what the size is. So that's a really fun example I like to use, that usually if you ask people what size of coffee they would choose, they would probably go for the medium, but it doesn't really matter what if you switched it to a large one the next day, and they would choose the large one even though they thought it was okay.
Yeah, it's so also the decoy effect here. Yeah,
exactly.
Sorry, it's a bit delayed.
No, it's all right. It's all right. So we know that Flavia is a she, so my apologies. And we have another question. What is your solution for gaining back the trust of market that has been damaged by a major blow? For example, gaining back the trust of investors after a big market crash.
Yeah, I think transparency is very important here. So one of the places that's being increased transparency is the insurance industry. For instance, Lemonade. If you don't know that company already, I think it's interesting to check out what they're doing, and it's actually backed by Dan Ariely. And I think transparency is is addressing the problem and then showing the solution to it. So I don't think it's okay to hide it and pretend to put it under the covers, but by being transparent about it and addressing it and providing the solution on top of it. And it's also the way to decrease the misperception and create the negative association towards that. So my number one solution here would be to be more transparent.
Basically, like owning up to what happened and explain. Do you think you can actually over-explain when something really, really bad happened?
I mean, it depends again on the case. I think over-explaining can happen for sure, but I think being transparent about it and owning up to it is what's important. I mean, it's not necessary to over-explain, but I think when people feel that they're trying to hide it and they're trying to push it back is when you lose trust more. So I think transparency can really help with building trust, and that is the next goal of the insurance companies as well, who are trying to apply behavioral sciences. A lot of insurance companies are perceived negatively, and they feel like you're stealing money from them and that they're not giving back. And by being more transparent, you can get closer to them, and this way you can build more trust, I think.
And for me, one interesting finding, again, talking to experts from across the globe, from Simon Moore, you can read the case study, was that financial institutions, we talked about this, they want to sound very seasoned, very trustworthy, and they think they need big words, and they really need to seem like they know what they're doing. But at the end of the day, this might actually be hurting them, like, because people don't really know much about finances. And Simon was very blunt about it. He only know two things, or people know only two things: when they get paid and when they go into debt. But they don't really want to admit this. They want to seem that they really know how to use all these gadgets with all the bells and whistles. So what they found was that when they actually really spoke in a way which reassured customers that it is really okay that you don't understand this, finances are complex, and it doesn't mean that because you don't know it, other people know it. No, nobody knows anything. That kind of got the trust they want people, because what they thought was that people don't trust financial institutions, and we hear it all the time. People don't trust financial institution. But what they found, interesting twist, when the bank was trying to decrease their churn rate, was that they needed to acknowledge or let people breathe a sign of relief that it's okay that people don't trust themselves with managing the money. It's not the problem that I don't trust bank, but I'm going to tell you that because I don't want to admit that I don't trust myself in knowing how to manage my own finances. So for me, that was like a really mind-blowing twist, because I think it's a huge trend. We get approached by banks to change customers' behavior, and they want tools and they want to enable them. But sometimes going back to the basics, like people don't know stuff, but they're ashamed to admit it, can actually really be super beneficial. So, okay,
Yeah.
What else do we have here? Other questions. How can we reach customers in the right state of mind? How much do we need to know about our customer in order to do this? And Jenna talks about opt-in from standard offer to premium offer. So can you give examples? So how to do this?
Sure.
How the best approach?
Yeah, so this one definitely has some ethical questions to the level of data privacy, but obviously our data to some extent is already being used, but it needs to be used ethically. But the idea here, for instance, would be if you're using Revolut, let's say, and you're traveling to a new country, then this application could provide you a notification that now you have the option to have free currency exchange, for instance. So this is the right state of mind. First of all, to bring you the benefit when you have the need. So if you're telling me this when I'm sitting at home in the office, this might not be beneficial to me. So I think it's really important to try to understand when the individual might have this need arising, and that's when you should trigger them. And the other thing is when they can act. So it's, again, if you're sitting on a bus and they're trying to make you upsell, it might not be the place where you will be upselling. So you have to understand what is the right state of mind, or what is the right timing when people will be able to act on their intentions, and also when are those benefits proving to be the most beneficial.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And we have a question from Miriam, which she asked it repeatedly, that you mentioned probably in the presentation, the different text, maybe similar text, can affect customers differently. Do you probably have like an example of specific copy which can either work, like make or break decision?
So different text, sorry, I couldn't hear completely.
Yeah, different wording, or like how can we use what we know about biases in text?
Yeah, so I think you're referring a bit to framing here, probably. And I think one of the interesting things we use a lot is to translating, for instance, as I mentioned, attributes into benefits. So I think that's one way to frame when you're telling about the same output, really, but to recreate this information on, like the umbrella example, of not what the umbrella looks like or not what the umbrella can do, but really the benefit of owning that. So I think that's what's important in framing. But there's also a lot of theoretical that I didn't want to bring these examples today, but there's a lot of studies on framing in different situations, like the opt-in, opt-out from the organ donation is a very famous example on whether it's framed as a loss or a gain. So I think playing with loss aversion is also very important. So it could be interesting to read some of these earlier studies on framing and how in these different contexts it works. But I didn't want to show those specific examples today, but I think it would be important to read on about them. So someone who's introduced to framing for the first time.
And do you think, we talked about it last time the two of us talked, do you think when it comes to FinTech, sex plays a role? So like should we use different maybe communication for different gender? Or because we talked about it previously that women are more loss aversive and less overconfident and stuff like that. So do you think it makes sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we've had a project on this in car sharing where we focused on the perceived value of how people perceive car sharing differently among genders. And I think that the same thing it can be found in FinTech. There's also statistics on different adoption between the genders, unfortunately. And I think it's definitely important to understand, again, through a lot of research on what is it that's most important to the different genders. And research says, for instance, that in FinTech and also in car sharing, men are more influenced by functional benefits, and women have a higher weight on the social benefits. So that's, for instance, one thing that we could take into account. And there's a lot of research on biases, as you said, overconfidence, loss aversion, that men tend to be more overconfident, women tend to have a higher loss aversion. So there's a lot of research on this that, of course, shouldn't be right away generalized. So it depends in the cultural context and the country where you're trying to apply this. But I do think that it's definitely an important area to understand how genders perceive FinTech differently and how the perceived value plays a role here.
Mm-hmm. And so, Rachel, you're really applying behavioral science across different projects. Can you probably remember what was like your, let's say, peak peak moment, like something which really surprised you or went against what you suspected or you thought you knew, and it was really something that you didn't maybe see coming, or it was like really influential when you really got to the bottom of it?
Yeah, I mean, this was not the biggest project we had, but I was very, very positively surprised. This was one of our social case studies on sustainability and recycling. And in this company, there was a very, very low percentage of recycling behavior. So it was like less than 1%. And we had a lot of interviews with the cleaning ladies and people who are taking out the trash, that people kept putting the wrong material into the trash. And at the end of the day, pretty much 100% of the trash were thrown into the mix. But we found out that people actually had the intention to recycle. And that's a very important finding here, that if they didn't have the intention, we would have had a completely different intervention project than if we know that they have the intention, but they cannot follow through with their, in order to facilitate the action. And there we, as I showed you, we had these social norm messages that were showing onto the screens of the people in the company. And we also were very surprised to apply commitment devices, because we haven't applied that earlier. And it proved to be very successful to make people pre-commit. And this was also interesting because we kind of mixed it with the New Year's, the New Year resolution. So we also used timing in this commitment device. So this was a project that was really inspiring for us. And we used many little behavioral techniques that proved to be a very, very high impact and also a very long-term impact. So we measured it over a longer period of time. And to our surprise, the recycling behavior didn't drop back down after the first measurement. So this was something we were very happy with recently. I think I would share this one.
And how do you get people to pre-commit to recycling? Like, do you say, like, this year I'm supposed to recycle X amount of cans? Do you do that? How did you?
Yeah, this was received in their emails, and we used different techniques like the messenger effect. So who is sending this message? That was very important here, because there was quite a lot of questions on who should be sending this message. But it was really like kind of hidden into a different questionnaire on what are their intentions, do they understand recycling? And at the end of the message, they had to, as I remember correctly, we connected it with the New Year resolution, and that this year we also emphasized the commitment from the company's perspective. And we said that we are committed to improving recycling, and do you commit to do your best possible? So we didn't want to push them too much to put a value next to it, as you said, like increase recycling by 50% or so. So we made it more general on purpose to make it a more softer intervention. But that's something that we've designed, and they received it as an email, actually.
Okay, so I think we have one more question for time for one more question. So Flavia again, she says, on the framing topic, if framing highlights benefits and not features, could customers become skeptical because they are no longer able to compare to other products based on features?
Yeah.
She asks.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the solution here is not to remove the attributes. The solution is to initially not to bombard them with too many attributes. So what Capital did, if you should check it out after on the website, is there's really a one click away. If you click on the drop down button, you can see all the different attributes mentioned there as well. But initially, the different options and the main difference is to be able to compare the packages was showing the benefits. So I agree with you. It would not be a good solution to remove the attributes. I think it just shouldn't be the initial information, and you should be able to want to look for the attributes in order to see all of them at the same time. So I think the idea is to use them together in a good manner, and to start with the benefits to help to aid with understanding, and then provide the necessary information to be able to have a better comparison.
Okay. So one more question from Sandra. When you say it's sustainable in the long term, how much later did you measure if they were still recycling? So what did the testing look like, basically, would be the question.
So it was, in the beginning, it was more frequent. So the problem here was that we created this chart where the cleaning ladies had to kind of check mark the end of the day how many of it. So they were very, very helpful. And this is not always the case with clients. So this was something that really helped with our measurement. And we could, because of this, they really enjoyed checking it. We could do it for several months. So I think we did it for about 5 months time. And that's a quite long measurement phase. So the first one was a very high increase. I don't remember the exact percentages, so I don't want to say the wrong information, but it was interesting to see how it further improved and stayed over months. So, and later on it was, I believe, every 3 weeks when we conducted the measurement, but we constantly received this kind of chart back from the local cleaning ladies. So we had pretty much measurement for every day of the week. During the work
sounds
days.
very thorough.
So it's a lot of number. This is usually not the case. I mean, it's not always, clients are not always this cooperative, but this one was a very special project because they were very helpful and very eager to help us with the measurement phase.
And so, like, final idea, Rachel, how do we get more people to get vaccinated? You mentioned it, that you had a little bit of, like, process your thought. What should we do?
Yeah, I mean, I think social norms, as we talked about today, is very, very important. And as I mentioned in the social proof one as well, that it's important to identify with the group. So I think, as we've seen like earlier in the news, I think like a couple months ago when the 3 presidents getting vaccinated together. So those things are very powerful, but it's also important to do subgroup targeting. So targeting concrete groups and concrete cultures and concrete subgroups in a society in order to feel more represented. So I would do some more social proof and social norm messages, but to be able to target individuals better and not on the large scale as well. Because research, for instance, shows that people are more trusting towards experts and people that they can align with and they can feel associated with. And very often, for instance, the government is not the best source for this. So I think we could design social norm and social proof messages a little bit better.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you guys for attending. And we will send you a follow-up email where you will find link to this stream so you can rewatch it or share it with your friends. And you will also find the special link with which you can access Inside BE 1 month for free. So give it a try to learn more about fascinating stuff that is going on right now in the world of business. So thank you very much, Rachel, for being so gracious and spending time with me. And we will see you next time with Mate this time. So thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Have a nice. Bye.
Bye.